When I called my son's school to check on him, the principal said, "His legal father is Mr. Malcolm." In that moment, the world I had been trying to rebuild collapsed all over again. I thought I was making progress, earning my place back in his life, but in a single sentence, I became a stranger. You see, Malcolm wasn't there when my son was born. He wasn't there when the fevers hit at 2 a.m. or when the bills piled up. But he was there now, on paper, in the school records, in every official document. And me? I was nothing more than a name fading in the background. What followed wasn't just a fight for legal rights. It was a fight for my son's heart. I discovered letters I had written, hidden away for years. I learned truths that twisted everything I thought I knew about my ex-wife, about Malcolm, and even about my son's silence. By the time the truth reached the courtroom, the lies had nowhere to hide. The day I walked into that hearing, I wasn't just fighting for a title. I was fighting for the only person who ever made me believe I could be more than my mistakes. Stay with me, because what happened next will make you question how far a father will go when love and justice are on the line. My name is Daniel Hayes. At 45, I've lived enough life to know regret is heavier than any load I ever hauled on a work site. For years, my life revolved around long hours as a mechanic, sometimes 14-hour shifts, trying to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. Back then, I thought I was doing the right thing, working myself to exhaustion so my wife and son wouldn't have to worry. But when you're not home, time slips away. My marriage unraveled quietly at first. Missed dinners, canceled anniversaries, long silences. By the time my son Ethan turned 7, the divorce papers were signed. His mother, Laura, got primary custody. I told myself I'd make up for lost time on weekends. I swore I wouldn't be one of those fathers who vanished. For years after, Saturdays became sacred. I'd drive an hour each way just to take Ethan out for pancakes or to toss a baseball at the park. But I noticed it, the distance that didn't come from miles, but from something else. His stories grew shorter. His laughter faded. Sometimes, he'd talk about events I didn't even know had happened. School plays, award ceremonies, sports games. I'd ask, "Why didn't you tell me, buddy? I would have been there." He'd shrug. "It's okay, Dad. Malcolm was there." That was the first time I heard Malcolm's name, spoken so casually. Malcolm was Laura's new husband. I told myself it was good Ethan had another man around when I couldn't be. But the more time passed, the more it felt like I was being quietly replaced. One spring afternoon, I showed up to a parent-teacher conference. Mrs. Carter, his teacher, looked surprised. "Oh, I thought Mr. Malcolm was coming. He usually attends." I smiled awkwardly, ignoring the sting in my chest. "No, I'm Ethan's father. I'm here." Her eyebrows knit for just a moment before smoothing over. "Of course. It's just, he's been so involved. It's nice to meet you." It hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I'd been working so hard to rebuild my place in Ethan's life. But in the eyes of his school, his teammates, maybe even his friends, I was slowly becoming invisible. Still, I kept showing up. Every Saturday, every chance I got. I thought presence would fix everything, that love would speak for itself. But with every passing year, my place felt more fragile. And in the quiet moments driving home alone after dropping Ethan off, I'd wonder how much longer I'd be welcome. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. Malcolm wasn't just filling in for me. He was building his own version of the truth, one where he was the steady, reliable father figure, and I was just an occasional visitor. At the time, I didn't know how far that version of the truth had spread. I didn't know it had found its way into school records, into legal documents, into the very identity my son was growing up with. But I would. It started subtly. At first, Ethan's phone calls got shorter, where he used to tell me every little detail, what he built in science class, how he scored in Little League. His answers shrank to one-word replies. "How's school going?" I'd ask on a Thursday evening. "Good, Mo," he'd say. "Anything exciting happen this week?" "Not really." Laura always had explanations ready. "He's just busy with homework." Or, "He's got soccer practice. Malcolm's taking him." Malcolm again. The name slipped into more and more conversations, like it belonged there, as if he were a natural part of the equation. At first, I told myself this was fine. Another adult caring for Ethan was better than none. But deep down, I felt the edges of my role being trimmed away. The cancellations began next. Saturdays that used to be ours suddenly became complicated. "I'm sorry, Dan. This weekend won't work," Laura would say. "Ethan's got a school trip. Malcolm's chaperoning." Or, "We're visiting Malcolm's parents. Can we reschedule?" I'd argue, but the calls always ended with me agreeing, thinking there'd be another chance. But the truth was, those chances were slipping away faster than I realized. Then came the day I ran into Kevin, an old coworker. We hadn't seen each other in years, and he spotted me outside a grocery store. "Dan, man, it's been ages. How's Ethan?" I smiled, a little surprised. "He's good, growing fast." Kevin hesitated, then said something that stuck in my head for weeks. "You know, I saw you at the science fair last month. Or at least, I thought it was you." Turned out it was someone named Malcolm Hayes. He even signed the participation forms. "I just assumed you changed your name or something." My chest tightened. "Malcolm Hayes?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. Kevin shrugged. "Yeah, he seemed very official. Teachers treated him like the dad. Didn't realize there was a mix-up." It wasn't a mix-up. It was something else entirely. I tried to brush it off, but it gnawed at me. The image of Malcolm standing where I should have been, signing forms with my last name, wasn't just uncomfortable. It was alarming. The next Saturday, I asked Ethan about the science fair. "Yeah, it was fun," he said, without much enthusiasm. "Did you win anything?" "We got second place." Malcolm helped set up the display. There was no malice in his voice, no awareness of the small knife he was twisting. But I felt it just the same. Malcolm wasn't just attending events. He was actively stepping into moments that should have been mine. Later that evening, I confronted Laura on the phone. "Why is Malcolm signing school documents as if he's me?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Dan, it's not like that. It's just easier for the school to deal with one consistent parent. You're not always available." The words hit harder than I expected. Easier. Consistent. It wasn't just about paperwork. It was about erasing my presence in Ethan's everyday life. And for the first time, I wondered if this wasn't just about convenience. Maybe this was about replacement. On the surface, Malcolm was always polite. Every time we crossed paths, he'd greet me with a firm handshake and a measured smile, the kind that left no room for open hostility. To outsiders, he probably looked like the perfect stepfather, engaged, reliable, and invested in Ethan's life. But beneath that friendly veneer, there was something calculated. He never argued with me directly. Instead, he let his actions speak louder than words, painting a quiet picture of consistency while I appeared as the occasional visitor. At school events, I noticed how teachers gravitated toward him. "It's so nice to see you again, Mr. Hayes," they'd say, often with a tone that made it sound like he was the parent who had always been there. I'd stand nearby, my presence almost an afterthought. The turning point came one afternoon when I arrived early to pick Ethan up. I stood near the parking lot, watching from a distance as Malcolm chatted with Ethan by the car. It was casual at first, just a hand on the shoulder, a laugh. But then I caught the tail end of a sentence that froze me in place. "Your dad means well, but he's not always reliable. You need stability, and I'm here for that." Ethan didn't argue. He just nodded, looking down at his shoes. The words hit me like a gut punch. It wasn't an open attack, but it planted seeds. Malcolm wasn't shouting that I was a bad father. He was quietly building an image where I simply wasn't enough. I confronted Laura about it later. "Did you tell Ethan I'm unreliable?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her response was a mix of annoyance and dismissal. "Dan, you're overreacting. We just want what's best for Ethan. You've missed things before, and he notices. Malcolm's just trying to reassure him." There it was, the subtle rewrite of history. Yes, I had missed moments, but not because I didn't care. And yet, every absence, every canceled weekend due to work years ago, was now ammunition in their quiet campaign to make me the unreliable one. It wasn't just in words, either. Malcolm's involvement grew in ways that pushed me further out. He volunteered as assistant coach for Ethan's soccer team. He handled parent-teacher meetings. He was at every awards ceremony. Even when I showed up, it felt like I was stepping into a space that was already claimed. The effect was gradual but powerful. Ethan stopped asking if I'd come to events. Sometimes, he didn't even tell me about them. And when I found out and asked why, the answer was always the same. "Malcolm told me you'd probably be busy." Gee, that was when the anger began to take root. Not just at Malcolm, but at the quiet way the narrative was shifting. This wasn't a confrontation I could win by shouting or accusing. This was a slow erasure, one I could feel but couldn't yet prove. Still, something in me shifted that day. I realized I wasn't just trying to win my son's affection back. I was trying to protect my place in his life before it disappeared entirely. It was a Monday morning when I decided to take action. The constant hints from Laura, the subtle words from Malcolm, and Ethan's growing distance. It was no longer enough to just show up on Saturdays and hope things would change. I needed to see for myself how deep Malcolm's involvement went. So I called the school. I told the secretary my name, gave Ethan's full name, and asked for a copy of his academic records. There was a pause on the line, then the sound of fingers typing on a keyboard. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes," she said carefully. "It seems you're not listed as the primary contact. You'll need permission from the legal guardian." I froze. "Legal guardian? I am his father." "Yes, of course," she replied, her voice almost apologetic. "But according to our records, the legal guardian is listed as Mr. Malcolm Hayes." It took me a moment to process what I'd just heard. Malcolm Hayes? My ex-wife's husband? Yes, sir. He's the one with legal authority to access and sign for Ethan's records. Her tone was neutral, but my pulse was anything but. My name wasn't just slipping out of casual conversations. It was disappearing from legal documents. I hung up and immediately called Laura. She answered on the third ring. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. "Why is Malcolm listed as Ethan's legal guardian at school?" Her sigh was heavy. "Dan, calm down. It's just easier this way. You're not around as much, and Malcolm can handle things during the week." Easier for who? Not for me. Not for Ethan when he grows up and wonders where I went. She went quiet, her silence confirming what I already feared. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. Determined to see just how far this had gone, I called the pediatrician's office next. I asked to schedule Ethan's upcoming checkup and requested a copy of his medical records. "I'm sorry, sir," the receptionist said politely. "We can't release that information to you without authorization from the listed guardian." I felt my stomach drop. And who exactly is the listed guardian? "Mr. Malcolm Hayes." The words rang in my ears like a bell tolling the end of something. I had been officially shut out, not just from school, but from medical decisions. I wasn't just being replaced emotionally. I was being erased administratively. I hung up, staring at the wall for what felt like hours. There was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation, just a cold, hollow ache in my chest. This was the moment I realized I was no longer fighting for visits or phone calls. I was fighting for the right to even exist in my son's life in any official capacity. The next weekend, I tried to bring it up with Ethan. I kept my tone light, not wanting to scare him. "Hey, buddy," I said, as we sat in the booth of our usual diner. "Do you know who the school calls when something comes up?" He looked at me with a hint of confusion. "They call Malcolm. He's usually the one who picks me up if something happens." I nodded slowly, forcing a smile. "Did you ever wonder why they don't call me?" He shrugged. "Mom said you're busy. Malcolm's always around. Always around." The phrase echoed in my mind long after I dropped him off. It wasn't his fault. To Ethan, this arrangement made sense. But to me, it was a clear sign of how thoroughly I had been pushed to the edges. In the following weeks, every interaction I had with the school or any institution seemed to reinforce the same truth. Malcolm wasn't just stepping in when I couldn't. He had been given the legal authority to stand in my place entirely. I began requesting copies of documents through formal channels. Some requests went unanswered. Others came back with polite rejections, citing confidentiality. Each denial felt like another door quietly locking behind me. At night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by half-filled binders, trying to piece together what had happened. Somewhere along the way, Laura and Malcolm had managed to change the legal landscape without me even realizing. And every piece of paper I didn't have access to was another reminder of how far I'd been shut out. For the first time since the divorce, I felt powerless. Not just because of what was happening, but because of how quietly it had been done. There were no arguments, no legal notices sent my way, just a gradual shifting of authority. Until one day, I woke up and found I'd been written out entirely. That night, as I stared at the pile of rejection letters, one thought solidified in my mind. This wasn't going to stop on its own. If I didn't do something now, there would come a day when I wasn't even a memory in my son's life. Just a name he used to know. It was the end of May when I finally decided I couldn't stay quiet. I drove to Laura's house one Thursday evening, hoping to catch her without Malcolm there. Ethan was at soccer practice, which gave us a rare moment alone. She opened the door, looking surprised. Dan, what are you doing here? I took a breath, trying to keep my voice level. We need to talk. About the school records, about the medical files, about why Malcolm is listed as Ethan's legal guardian. Her expression hardened, the polite mask she wore in public slipping just slightly. Dan, we've been over this. Ethan needs stability. He needs someone he can depend on, and Malcolm is that person. The words landed like a slap. I'm his father, Laura. I've been here every weekend, every holiday I'm allowed. I've called, I've shown up. How is that not stability? She shook her head, her tone cool. You're around when you can be. Malcolm is around all the time. That's what Ethan needs. For a moment, I just stared at her. It wasn't an argument about love or commitment. It was a verdict, and I had already been sentenced in her mind. As I turned to leave, the sense of injustice burned hot in my chest. It wasn't just Malcolm replacing me. It was Laura rewriting the story of my role in Ethan's life to fit their narrative. A week later, the twist I didn't see coming landed in my lap. I was at Ethan's soccer game, standing at the edge of the field. The parents clustered in their usual groups, chatting about summer camps and vacations. That's when a woman I didn't recognize walked up to me. You're Ethan's dad, right? She asked. I nodded cautiously. Yeah, I am. She lowered her voice, glancing around. I thought you should know. Malcolm's been talking to people about applying for permanent guardianship. He told the other parents you weren't really in the picture anymore. My stomach twisted. What did he say exactly? Her eyes softened with pity. He said you'd been gone for years, that Ethan barely knew you. He said the court should make it official, so there's no confusion. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's not true. I've been here. I've been here every week. She nodded sympathetically. I know. That's why I thought you should hear it from someone who's not in their circle. They're building a case, and it's not just about what's on paper. It's about public opinion. Her words stuck with me long after the game ended. Malcolm wasn't just moving in the legal system. He was moving in the court of community opinion, and that in some ways was just as dangerous. In the days that followed, I began noticing the small shifts in how people interacted with me. Other parents were polite but distant, their smiles a little tighter. At the coffee shop near the school, conversation stopped when I walked in. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Malcolm's version of the story was spreading. The worst moment came at another game when I overheard two parents whispering near the bleachers. Well, it makes sense. A kid needs someone who's around full time. I heard the dad disappeared for a while. Malcolm stepped up. I clenched my jaw, pretending I hadn't heard. But inside, my frustration was boiling over. It wasn't enough that they'd shifted the paperwork. They were dismantling my credibility piece by piece in the eyes of everyone around Ethan. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the voices echoing in my head. Ethan needs stability. Malcolm is that person. It wasn't just a statement from Laura. It was becoming the community's consensus, and I realized something important. If I didn't fight back soon, it wouldn't matter what the legal document said. The court of public opinion would have already decided who Ethan's father was. The day of the school's annual awards ceremony was supposed to be a turning point. I had hoped, maybe even believed, that this time I'd be there for Ethan when he stood on that stage, his smile bright, proud of his achievements. I arrived early, dressed in my best shirt, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. I was nervous, but determined. This wasn't just about awards. It was about showing up, proving that I was still part of his life. But when I stepped through the school doors, I was met with a chilly reception. The front office staff didn't look surprised to see me, but their smiles were tight, almost rehearsed. "I'm here for Ethan," I told them. They exchanged looks. "Unfortunately, Mr. Hayes, the event is by invitation only, and this year, only the legal guardians are permitted." My heart sank. "Legal guardians?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. The school's policy is strict. We're sorry." I stood there for a moment, the bouquet suddenly feeling like a weight too heavy to carry. Outside, I watched as parents and children filed into the auditorium. There, at the front of the room, was Malcolm. He smiled confidently, shaking hands with the principal and teachers. When Ethan's name was called, Malcolm was the one who went up on stage to congratulate him, placing a hand on his shoulder. The crowd applauded. Malcolm beamed like he owned the moment. I turned away, my chest tight, lungs burning with a mix of anger and helplessness. This wasn't just about missing an event, it was a declaration. Malcolm was the father here, officially recognized by the school, the community, and perhaps most painfully, by my own son. Later that night, I tried calling Ethan, my voice strained. "Dad, it was a great night," he said, excitement in his tone. "Did you want me there?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. "I don't know," he admitted. "Malcolm was there." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "I'm always here for you, Ethan, no matter what." But those words felt hollow, like trying to hold water in my hands. The next days were the hardest. I found myself questioning everything. My past mistakes, my worth as a father, my place in Ethan's life. The legal barriers, the emotional distance, the social pressures. They were closing in like a storm. At work, my mind drifted to the awards ceremony. I could still see Malcolm's smile, still hear the applause meant for Ethan's proudest moment. But it wasn't me standing beside him. It wasn't my hand on his shoulder. I realized then that if I didn't fight harder, this would be the last time I stood on the sidelines watching my son's life unfold without me. I hadn't planned on running into Malcolm that day. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where I tried to keep my head down and focus on work. But fate has a way of throwing you into the fire when you least expect it. I was at the community center, dropping off a box of donated tools for a vocational program. As I turned the corner into the lobby, there he was, Malcolm, standing in a circle of parents, laughing comfortably, his presence commanding the space like he'd earned every inch of it. When he saw me, the smile didn't falter. If anything, it sharpened. "Dan," he said, walking over, "didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," I replied. He gave a short laugh, glancing toward the parents who were still watching us. Then his voice dropped just enough for only me to hear. "You know, it's better for everyone if you step back. On paper, I'm Ethan's father. In reality, I'm the one here every day. Your history." The words landed with the precision of a blade. I had braced myself for dismissive comments before, but never something this blunt, this final. I took a breath, my voice low. You're here because Laura let you be here. You're here because I was working to provide. That doesn't erase me." Malcolm's smile didn't waver, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a kind of cold confidence that said he believed he had already won. "Dan, you're clinging to something that doesn't exist anymore. Ask anyone here who Ethan's father is, and they'll tell you, it's me. That's the reality." Before I could respond, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a group of kids, Ethan among them. My son's eyes darted between us, sensing tension, but saying nothing. "Hey, sport," Malcolm said to him, clapping him on the shoulder. Ethan gave a small smile. "Hi." I stepped forward. "Ethan, can I talk to you for a second?" He hesitated, then nodded. Malcolm didn't stop him, but I could feel his eyes on us as we moved to a quieter corner of the lobby. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I searched his face, looking for some trace of the boy who used to light up when he saw me. "How have you been?" I asked finally. "Fine," he said, his voice neutral. I nodded, fighting the ache in my chest. "I miss you at these events. I miss hearing about your life." He looked down at his shoes, then back up at me. His expression shifted, hesitant, conflicted. Then, almost imperceptibly, he reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small envelope. "This is yours," he said quietly, slipping it into my hand. I looked at the envelope. My name was on it, but the handwriting was mine. I frowned. "Where did you get this?" "It was in Mom's desk," he said. "I think you sent it a long time ago. I never saw it before." I turned the envelope over in my hands. It was sealed, but aged, the kind of envelope that had been tucked away for years. My throat tightened. I remembered the letter now. I had written it after the divorce, during a time when I couldn't see him as often as I wanted. It was full of apologies, promises, and the kind of words a father hopes will bridge the gaps that time and distance create. "You've never read it?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I think Mom didn't want me to." A flood of emotions hit me at once. Anger, sadness, and something else I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The fact that Ethan had found the letter, that he had chosen to give it to me now, meant something. I closed my hand around the envelope. "Thank you," I said softly. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then glanced over his shoulder toward Malcolm. "I have to go," he said, his voice almost apologetic. I watched as he walked back to Malcolm, who placed a hand on his shoulder and led him toward the exit. The sight twisted something inside me, but this time there was something else mixed in with the pain. For the first time in months, I felt the faint spark of a shift. Ethan hadn't defended me openly, but he had given me something that felt more important than words, a sign that there was still a thread connecting us, however fragile. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the envelope in front of me. I didn't open it. Not yet. The letter was a relic of a time when I believed that words alone could fix what was broken. But now, it was proof. Proof that my absence hadn't been neglect, that my love had always been there, even when Laura tried to keep it hidden. I knew then that this wasn't over. Malcolm could say I was the past, all he wanted. Laura could try to erase my presence from every official record. But the truth was, I was still here, and Ethan knew it. I didn't open the letter right away. For days, it sat on my kitchen table, the envelope a silent reminder of everything I had lost. And maybe, just maybe, what I still had left. Finally, on a quiet Sunday morning, I sat down with a cup of coffee and carefully tore it open. The handwriting inside was my own. The words raw and uneven. Ethan, I know things are different now. I wish I could be there more. I want you to know I'm always thinking about you. I'm proud of you. I love you. I'll always find a way to be in your life. There was more. A note at the bottom I had nearly forgotten writing. Tell your mom to call me about the school trip. I've already sent the money for it. My chest tightened. I remembered that trip. I remembered calling Laura about it, and I remembered her telling me there was nothing to discuss, that she'd handled it. But the letter told a different story. I had sent money. I had tried to arrange being there. She had simply chosen to keep me out. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about absence. It wasn't that I had disappeared from Ethan's life. It was that every attempt I'd made to stay connected had been quietly blocked. I sat back in my chair, the anger simmering beneath the surface. For years, I'd carried the guilt of not being enough, of not doing enough. But here was proof that I had been trying, and that my efforts had been deliberately erased. That changed everything. Ethan. Giving me that letter meant he had questions. He might not be ready to ask them out loud, but the fact that he passed it to me was a sign. He was starting to see cracks in the story he'd been told. I looked at the letter again, my hands steady now. The words I'd written years ago didn't just speak to the past, they spoke to the fight ahead. For the first time in a long time, I felt my focus sharpen. This wasn't about proving my worth as a father anymore. This was about showing the truth. And if Laura and Malcolm had been so confident in hiding it, then exposing it would shake the foundation they had built. I folded the letter carefully, slipping it into a folder with the few other documents I had. Receipts for support payments, copies of old messages, photos of the times I'd been there. I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going to take back what had been taken from me. The letter had changed everything. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a crack in the wall Laura and Malcolm had built around my son. And I knew I needed more cracks, enough to bring the whole thing down. I started by going through every old file I had. I dug into the boxes in my closet, pulling out folders I hadn't opened in years. There were copies of bank transfers to Laura, receipts for school trips I'd funded, and even some old emails where she'd thanked me for helping. Emails that told a very different story than the one she was telling now. I printed everything, labeling each page with dates. I wanted a timeline, something that showed I hadn't just vanished. I'd been there, quietly and consistently, while they'd painted me as absent. Then I combed through my phone records. I still had old text messages, dozens of them, where I'd asked about Ethan's school events, medical appointments, and sports games. Most of them ended with Laura saying, "I'll handle it," or "Malcolm's taking care of it." The more I collected, the angrier I became. Each piece of evidence wasn't just proof. It was a piece of my fatherhood they'd tried to erase. And then came the twist I didn't see coming. One afternoon, as I was leaving work, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Mrs. Carter, one of Ethan's former teachers. "Mr. Hayes," she said cautiously, I hope it's okay that I'm calling you directly. I heard some things, and I think you should know. I gripped the phone tighter. Go on. There was a year when some of Ethan's records were updated at the school, she said. It was unusual because the forms were signed in your name, but I remember Malcolm delivering them. At the time, I didn't think much of it. People trust step-parents to handle things. But looking back, I think the records were altered without your consent. My pulse quickened. Are you saying he forged my signature? I can't say that for sure, she replied carefully, but I can say I'm willing to testify to what I saw. If this ever goes to court, I'll tell them exactly what happened. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. After months of feeling isolated, here was someone willing to stand up for the truth. Thank you, I said, my voice steady. That means more than you know. After the call ended, I added her name to my growing list of evidence. This wasn't just a fight over paper anymore. It was a fight I could win. That night, I spread everything out on my kitchen table. The letter, the receipts, the text messages, and now, the name of a teacher willing to speak up. I wasn't walking into this blind anymore. I was walking in with proof. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just trying to hold on. I was ready to take something back. Filing the petition wasn't just a legal step. It was a declaration. For months, I'd been sidelined, erased, treated like my role in Ethan's life was optional. That changed the moment I handed the documents to the clerk at the county courthouse. Request to review guardianship and custodial rights, the clerk read aloud, stamping the forms. You'll be notified of the hearing date. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a weight shift. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to Malcolm and Laura's moves. I was making my own. When the news reached Malcolm, he didn't call me directly. I heard through Laura. She phoned me one evening, her voice icy. Dan, this is unnecessary. You're just going to embarrass yourself. I kept my tone calm. I'm not doing this to embarrass anyone. I'm doing this for Ethan. He deserves to know the truth. Her silence told me she didn't expect that answer. Malcolm, on the other hand, seemed unshaken. Word got back to me through mutual acquaintances. He was confident. Why wouldn't he be? He had the community's trust, Laura's backing, and on paper, everything looked airtight. But Malcolm didn't know what I had. The day of the first hearing, the courtroom felt smaller than I'd imagined. Malcolm sat across from me in a tailored suit, Laura at his side. He looked like a man certain of victory, his smile faint but steady. The judge began by reviewing the petition. Mr. Hayes is requesting a review of legal guardianship, citing concerns over proper procedure and documentation. Malcolm's lawyer rose. Your Honor, my client has acted solely in the best interest of the child. There is no basis for this petition. That was when my attorney stood. Your Honor, we have reason to believe certain school records and guardianship documents were altered without Mr. Hayes' consent. We request these be entered into evidence. The clerk handed over the folder. Inside were the copies of forms Malcolm had submitted bearing my signature, except they weren't mine. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Hayes, are you stating these signatures are not yours? I am, I said firmly. And I have witnesses to corroborate that these forms were delivered by Mr. Malcolm Hayes, not me. At that, Mrs. Carter, the teacher who had called me, was sworn in. Her testimony was clear and unwavering. She had seen Malcolm hand over the forms, claiming I had signed them. Malcolm shifted in his seat, his confidence faltering for the first time. Laura avoided my gaze. The judge examined the documents again, his expression tightening. These are serious allegations. If proven true, they could impact the validity of the current guardianship arrangement. For the first time in months, I felt the balance tilt. This wasn't just me shouting into the void. The truth was on record now, in black and white, and Malcolm couldn't smile his way out of it. As we left the courtroom, Malcolm's expression was darker than I'd ever seen it. His confidence had cracked. He had walked in thinking this was just another formality, that my petition would be dismissed without a second thought. But now the game had changed, and for the first time, he knew it. The week after the first hearing, I could feel the change in Malcolm's approach. His confident silence was gone, replaced by a more aggressive stance. 2 days later, my attorney forwarded me a packet of documents filed by Malcolm's lawyer. Inside were claims aimed squarely at my credibility, records of old debts, statements about my extended work hours, and insinuations that I had been absent from Ethan's formative years. It was a classic move. If he couldn't erase my evidence, he'd undermine my character. At the next hearing, Malcolm's lawyer wasted no time. Your Honor, while my client acknowledges the signature discrepancies, we must also consider Mr. Hayes's history. This is a man who has struggled financially, who has not always been consistently present in his son's life. Stability is essential for the child, and Mr. Malcolm Hayes has provided that. I sat there, my fists tight, listening as my life was condensed into a carefully crafted accusation. Malcolm sat beside his lawyer, calm again, as though he believed this line of attack would put the final nail in my case. But he didn't know what I had brought with me. When it was our turn, my attorney rose. Your Honor, my client does not dispute that he faced financial difficulties in the past. However, those debts were resolved years ago. We have certified records from the credit agencies confirming all accounts were settled long before any guardianship petition was filed. He handed the judge a thick folder of documents, bank statements, settlement letters, payment records. The judge flipped through them slowly, then looked back up. These appear to be in order. And as for the claim of absence, my attorney continued, we have proof of continuous financial support provided by Mr. Hayes. While the opposing party suggests he was absent, we can show regular support payments over the years, payments that were documented and processed through the court system, but perhaps not shared openly with the child. He handed over another folder, this one containing years of receipts, each one marked and dated. I watched Malcolm's expression shift again. Laura's jaw tightened. The judge took his time reviewing the evidence before speaking. This changes the context considerably. Mr. Hayes has demonstrated financial responsibility and consistent involvement, even if it was not always visible to the child. In that moment, the tension in my chest eased. Malcolm's strategy of painting me as unreliable had cracked, just like his earlier confidence over the signatures. As we left the courtroom, I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't going according to his plan. He had expected me to fold under the weight of my past, but instead, I had turned it into proof of my persistence. The narrative was shifting, and for the first time, it felt like I wasn't just defending myself. I was winning. The final day of the hearing felt like walking into a storm, I had been preparing for my entire life. The room was packed, Laura and Malcolm sitting stiffly at one table, me at the other with my attorney. The judge's face was calm, but the air was thick with anticipation. The clerk called the case, and the judge began. We have reviewed extensive evidence regarding the guardianship of Ethan Hayes. Today, both parties will have the opportunity to present final testimony. Malcolm's lawyer went first. His voice was steady, confident, still clinging to the image of Malcolm as the stable father figure. Your Honor, regardless of past mistakes, the present reality is that my client has been the consistent guardian. This arrangement is in the child's best interest. When it was our turn, my attorney stood. Your Honor, the question is not just about consistency. It is about legality and honesty. We have already presented evidence that school documents were altered. Today, we bring forward testimony that proves these actions were not accidental. The clerk called Mrs. Carter. She walked to the stand, calm but determined. Under oath, she repeated what she had told me, that she had seen Malcolm deliver documents with my signature. Documents I had never signed. The judge's expression darkened. Mr. Hayes, he said, turning to Malcolm, do you deny submitting these documents? Malcolm hesitated, his confidence visibly faltering. I may have delivered them on behalf of Laura, but it was always in Ethan's best interest. The judge's gaze shifted to Laura. And did you authorize this? Laura's voice was tight. We just wanted things to be simpler for the school. The courtroom murmured, simpler. That word hung in the air like a confession. Then my attorney stood again. Your Honor, there is one more piece of testimony we'd like to present. Ethan himself. We understand the sensitivity, but his perspective is crucial. The judge agreed, and a moment later, Ethan walked in. My heart twisted seeing him there. Taller, more reserved, but still my son. He took the stand, glancing briefly at me before looking at the judge. Ethan, the judge said gently, can you tell us about your relationship with both Mr. Hayes and Mr. Malcolm? Ethan hesitated, then spoke quietly. Malcolm's been around a lot, but sometimes he wouldn't let me call my dad. He said it would just make things complicated. The room went still. Did he say why? The judge asked. Ethan's voice trembled. He said Dad was busy, that it was better if I just talked to him when it was scheduled, but I wanted to call more. I just couldn't. I felt something in my chest break, not from pain this time, but from the weight of the truth finally being spoken aloud. The judge looked back at Malcolm, his tone sharp now. This is deeply concerning. The role of a guardian is to support the child's relationship with both parents, not obstruct it. Malcolm didn't answer. Laura stared down at the table, her face pale. When the session ended, the judge's ruling was clear. The guardianship arrangement was to be reviewed. My legal rights reinstated. Malcolm's authority was reduced to a secondary role, subject to oversight. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth was no longer hidden. And most importantly, Ethan had chosen to speak it himself. For the first time, I believed we might finally be able to rebuild. The days following the judge's ruling felt surreal. For months, I had walked into every hearing braced for disappointment, expecting another setback. But this time, I walked out with a piece of paper that restored what I had been fighting for all along, my legal standing as Ethan's father. The ruling wasn't perfect. I didn't get sole custody, and I didn't expect to, but I had joint legal rights again. My name reinstated on all school and medical records. I had the authority to make decisions about my son's life. Most importantly, I had the right to see him without interference. Malcolm, on the other hand, walked away from that courtroom with more than just a legal downgrade. His reputation took a hit. Word spread quickly in the community. Parents who once nodded warmly now offered only polite, distant acknowledgments. The man who had built his image as the perfect stepfather now carried the shadow of forged documents and court scrutiny. Laura didn't escape unscathed either. The judge issued a formal warning. Any future obstruction of communication between Ethan and me would be grounds for revisiting custody. Her carefully constructed narrative of me as the unstable father had cracked, and she knew it. The school wasted no time updating their files. My name was back in the system, not as an afterthought, but as Ethan's father. The principal called me personally. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I wanted to let you know that your contact information has been restored. You'll receive all future communications directly." It was a small thing, but hearing those words felt like reclaiming a part of myself. The first weekend after the ruling, I picked Ethan up without the usual undercurrent of tension. There were no awkward exchanges at the door, no reminders about time limits. We drove to our usual diner, the same booth we'd sat in for years. For the first time, the conversation felt easy. He told me about school, about his friends, about the book he was reading. I didn't push him to talk about the court or Malcolm. I just listened. It wasn't total victory. I didn't walk away with Ethan living under my roof full time, but I didn't need a perfect win. I needed a fair one, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had it. Rebuilding wasn't instant. A court order couldn't erase years of distance, and I didn't expect it to. But what it could do was give us space to start over, without walls being quietly built between us. In the weeks following the ruling, my visits with Ethan became more natural. At first, there were long stretches of silence in the car, the kind that used to make me nervous. Now, I let them breathe. Sometimes we talked about school, sometimes about sports, and sometimes about nothing at all. I learned that not every moment needed to be filled. Sometimes just being there was enough. I also learned that rebuilding trust wasn't about big gestures. It was about consistency. Showing up when I said I would, answering when he called, listening without trying to fix everything. I'd spent years trying to prove I was a good father. Now, I realized I just needed to be one. One Saturday afternoon, we were sitting at our usual booth at the diner. Ethan was telling me about a science project, his hands moving animatedly as he explained how he and his team had built a model bridge. I was half listening, half just watching him, trying to memorize the small details, the way his eyes lit up, the way his voice rose when he was excited. Then, in the middle of his sentence, he stopped. He looked at me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Dad," he said quietly. "Yeah, buddy?" He hesitated for just a second before continuing. "Do you want to have dinner tomorrow? Just us?" It was such a simple question, but it landed with the weight of everything we'd been through. I nodded, my throat tight. I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. As we finished our meal, I realized that this was the real victory, not the legal documents, not the court rulings, but this quiet invitation from my son. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough.